went out to the public with 4 outreach meetings and this virtual meeting in order to engage with the public and understand firsthand some of the information that we may not uncover, to check some of our results with the public to see what might not be correct or what might need to be updated. And then the plan is to go before the board in December, complete the study and derive the recommendations after we get input from this meeting, and then implement the board's direction in 2024. So the first effort was first part of the methodology, defining the study area. We focused it in the Mountain and East Desert regions. This is where most of the short-term rental activity is occurring, scouring various data sets and platforms, conducting research on the housing trends and the short-term rental programs, both in and around the state, and then to identify, if possible, to the degree possible, those short-term rental units that were occupied by long-term renters, or the housing trends that were indicating that housing pricing was causing pressures on owners. Now, we did go through a number of sources, some before the outreach meetings, some after, based on public input. Unfortunately, the county does not operate its long-term rental permit right now. The property management companies did not seem to want to engage with the county. Some of the data sets we had the highest hopes were blocked by legal restrictions in order to identify patterns. And then we did talk with all of the school districts, homeless liaisons, other service providers and organizations, but did not get any clear data from them related to short-term rental activity and its relationship to either the causes of housing insecurity or other housing issues. The next step was to evaluate the impact of short-term rental activity on the housing market and try as best we can to distinguish it from the broader trends given the data, and then finally come back with recommendations, both anything to change the county regulations or identify additional opportunities to improve housing. So that's going to be brought forth in the December presentation. On the outreach, we heard from a lot of people. We had about 300 people attend over the 4 meetings. We got about 200 emails, all of which was very good and helped us to steer some additional insight. The vast majority of comments were really about the management and operations of short-term rental activities. You can see some of the comments cited there. Really a concern about the use of short-term rentals in the residential neighborhoods and how well they are managed. And then other concerns about fees and taxes related to short-term rentals, including TOT funds. In the mountain communities, as it relates to housing affordability, there was really a mix of those who felt that short-term rentals reduce the supply of long-term housing, and those who said, hey, there's a longer historical cyclical trend and nature of short-term rentals and long-term rental housing. There were a number that cited the rise in insurance premiums and other costs that affected both existing and new owners. And many thought that most vacation homes generally are not going to be available for long-term renters because people do want to use them seasonally. In the East Desert area, that was a different story. These are communities that were not as historically occupied by short-term occupied seasonal homes. This was mostly year-round residents, and prices were generally more affordable before the pandemic. And there were stories and video testimonies from a number of entities that offered some additional insight. Both regions said that the changes in state laws made it difficult to rent to long-term rentals, and that was one reason why some were indicating a decline in long-term rental activity. Again, we heard reaching into the schools, the real estate professionals, homeless groups to try and engage them and understand the impacts. I cited before, some information was gleaned from them, but not nearly the degree of detail that we were looking for. But everyone wanted the county to help do whatever it could to facilitate more affordable housing beyond the short-term rental activity. So in the longer economic trends, overall, affordable housing used to be something that was really limited to a few parts of the country, especially on the coastal areas and in the high and affluent areas. And now you can see there's data that indicates that people must earn at least $100,000 a year to afford the median prices across a wide spread of the United States. And this is not limited to ownership. Now over a third of rental households pay more than 30% of their income for housing in most metropolitan areas and counties across the nation. So housing costs are going up everywhere. And the supply of housing nationwide has not been keeping up. And this is particularly true in California. This is a chart. The darkest line on there is basically the southern inland counties that include San Bernardino County. And this is the number of housing units available in an area compared to the number of people. And you can see that it's just been declining. We have been, even with the decreases in overall population, the housing stock has not been keeping up with population. And so as more people compete for fewer homes, that drives up housing prices. And this can be particularly bad in areas where you have a high percentage of second homes. The lack of construction also drives up the cost of rental housing. So this chart shows that rents have increased substantially, and these are all adjusted for inflation, and the majority of rental units are now above $1,400 per month. Other factors are in play. You can see around the country that areas that are at a higher risk of disaster loss, the premiums are rising, and this is contributing to the cost for existing and new homeowners and renters. So when we look towards the future at the people who will need housing and what jobs they have and what pay they will make, we looked at the top 25 fastest growing occupations between 2020 and 2030 for the Inland Empire. This chart I know is a little small, but it's worth downloading and looking at later. Essentially shows those occupations where you have the largest number of job openings projected for 2020 to 2030. And basically what it says is that in terms of ownership, only 2 of those 25 can afford the median home price, either alone or with dual incomes. We did look at the salary schedule for the various school districts, and it looks like the median wage for a local public school teacher, luckily, is towards the high end, but obviously there's a range of teacher salaries and teacher positions depending on your seniority. But these are the 2 occupations that don't have an issue or earning or affording the median home price. When it comes to rental, there's more, a little bit over half, but still 14 of the 25 need dual incomes in order to afford the median rent for a 2-bedroom house or apartment. And the top 2 fastest growing occupations need dual incomes to afford a 1-bedroom rent. And this is across the entire county. When we look back at tourist accommodations prior to the 1990s, this is a photo of Camp Fleming from the early 1920s. The mountain region's resort history really started early on in the 1800s, and the tourist accommodations were primarily all the way through the 1990s under the operation and control of hotels and management companies. As we all generally know, 2 entities emerged in the 1990s and 2000s to allow for individual owners to more easily rent their homes without going through a larger management company. And then the county formalized a permit system for short-term rentals in 2017 and 2019. There were some improvements in the widespread availability of high-speed internet in 2019 and just before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, and that really pushed a lot of remote work, remote living, and the push into rural communities. And at the same time, you had one of the biggest generations, the baby boomers, start to retire in much higher numbers. And many of these households have been benefiting, especially along the coast, in the rising housing values, and we're flush with home equity, and we're looking to retire somewhere that is beautiful and desirable. Remote work was already slowly a little bit on the rise, and the pandemic just pushed that rate into overdrive, increased dramatically across a wide range of industries. You can see the various industries. Obviously, some of them stay much closer to the need to be in brick and mortar, but more and more people are able to work remotely, and that means they're able to live remotely. This is a map that I've shown a number of times. This is just the broader area. Most of the mountain communities and parts of the East Desert communities have enhanced internet access since the pandemic and since before, really, to enhance remote work and the long-term and short-term stays as well. And when we look at when short-term rental activity first occurred, over half of short-term rentals were listed for the first time as a short-term rental after the onset of the pandemic. So indicating this is something that really did get ramped up during the pandemic. And this chart is updated, updated even for what was in the Granicus numbers, more consistent with to be consistent, and we updated the Granicus report. So you can see that in 2021, the short-term rental activity starts to pick up right around the time that the state and federal restrictions on tourism start to end. And it peaks around July 2022 with about 7,749 units of individual STRs. And then we're seeing signs of slowing with an additional seasonal peak, although not nearly to the levels of 2022. So you see that 6,395 as of September, so well below the 2022 levels. When we look at the number of short-term rentals by community, now not every community is shown, but this is the majority of them. You can see that most of the short-term rentals are in roughly 3 to 5 communities. The East Desert is predominantly in Joshua Tree with a significant number proportionally, but still a smaller number overall. And then Big Bear City and Lake Arrowhead have the largest numbers in the mountain region. And when we look at ownership, in general, very few short-term rentals are owned by people who live in the same region, and even kind of down to the same zip code. The areas where you see the highest rates of short-term rentals, so Big Bear City, Lake Arrowhead, those are only running about 8 or 7%. In Joshua Tree, it's a little higher at 22%. The other communities where the rates are much higher, you also have smaller overall total numbers of short-term rentals. So on to the topics of housing cost and supply. So the home values in the mountain and East Desert communities were very low to start with in 2015, especially compared to other either unincorporated communities or incorporated areas or the statewide average. And then when you saw in 2022, after the onset of the pandemic, almost all of the unincorporated areas, home values had kind of risen to $300,000 or above. In many areas, we're closer to $400,000. And since then, the peak of 2022, home values have dropped an average of 8% overall. But we've actually seen a steeper decline in places where you have the greatest numbers of short-term rentals, about 14% drop compared to 8% drop. So what we saw is that the places that started at the lowest values in 2015 had the greatest opportunity to rise. And so they had the steepest rate of increase, but it was easier to increase from, let's say, 150,000 than it is to increase from 250,000. And really what we saw as evidence is that the Eastern Desert communities became part of the home buying fabric that were available to people that were daily workers, especially because of the remote work. And so the housing prices reflected this. So you can look at short-term rental activities in 2018 to 2020, and sorry for the attempt to save on energy efficiency, our lights turned off there, but now they're back on. So when you look at 2018 to 2022, and we try to compare short-term rental prices to single-family homes, you can see that they are very similar between the regions before the pandemic, and then they start to accelerate beyond the median for the entire county. So these are the areas where you saw the prices going higher, and that is largely because they were higher in demand. When you look at the sales prices in Joshua Tree and Big Bear City, you can see that prior to the pandemic, the short-term rental versus non-short-term rental single-family home, the prices were relatively consistent. And even in the mountain communities, they stayed relatively consistent in the pandemic, largely owing, we think, due to the long-standing history of short-term rental activity in the mountain region. You started to see a disparity in the pricing in Joshua Tree, and it was really only after the pandemic occurred, however. When we look at the economic model of short-term rentals, you look at, as a property owner, you can look at what rent you might expect to make compared to the nightly price you might expect to bring in as a short-term rental. And the fewer nights you need to rent as a short-term rental, the more desirable that economic model might be compared to long-term rentals. So you see some of the communities listed here and basically how many days on the right it would take to equal a month rent. Now you'd have to rent these successfully every single month or have your peak months where you average this for the year. And based on a sample of about 2,000 short-term rentals by Granicus, only about a little bit more than a third book more than 60 nights per year, which is generally about what you would need to equal the median rent. And less than a quarter book more than 90 nights per year. And even more significant is over 90% generate less than $25,000 of income per year, which is also generally about what you would need to earn the higher median rent values. And then just under half generate $5,000 or less, indicating to us that most people on short-term rentals are using them as seasonal homes with incidental use as short-term rental for some incidental income. When we look at the communities and how their household makeup looks right now, we can see that, as we heard in the meetings, Big Bear City is predominantly a seasonal community. Same with Lake Arrowhead. Crestline is different, is majority year-round, but most of the mountains communities is seasonal. And when you look at the housing market and how it's changed over the last decade, in terms of occupancy, it's relatively similar. So these charts show for each of these three communities, these are the ones where census data was available. You can see the rates of what we call vacation or second homes. Those are those seasonal homes. And then the rates of owner-occupied homes and the rates of renter-occupied homes between 2010 and 2021. And so you can see that in Big Bear City and Lake Arrowhead, it's relatively similar with rental households actually going up in Lake Arrowhead. In Crestline, it's a little different there. We actually saw seasonal housing go down and ownership housing go up. Rental housing going down a little bit, frankly, anything within 1 or 2% within the margin of error. When we look at the East Desert community, here you can see that Morongo Valley is majority year-round. Obviously, all of these are majority year-round. But Joshua Tree and Homestead Valley are more up towards the 20 to 25% vacation homes. And that really has changed over the years in Joshua Tree. Homestead Valley and Morongo Valley have stayed relatively similar. In Morongo Valley, rental households have gone up and vacation and second home ownership rates have gone down a little bit. In Homestead Valley, it's kind of the flip-flop of that, but both are relatively small percentage differences. In Joshua Tree, however, you see that the rates have gone from 5 to 21% for that seasonal housing. Rental housing has gone up a tick, and owner-occupied housing really seems to be where the trade-off has occurred. So when we then looked towards beyond 2021 and we looked at the homes that were built after 2020, 2021, 2022, Most of those we can assume are largely formed based on the pandemic's influence for either seasonal housing to be potentially used for short-term rentals or directly as short-term rentals and never intended for long-term rental occupancy. So now we're going to go towards next steps and questions. And I will turn it back over to Heidi.
Thank you, Colin. So we are tentatively scheduled to be presenting this before the board on December 19th. That was a lot of the questions we did receive prior to tonight's meeting. So this, just also as a heads up, we are recording the meeting and we will be posting it just so that anybody who missed it, if you want to share it, it will be available. And the information is on our screen. It's the same site that the study was found and the information you've been receiving. So next steps is we're going to, at least for the presentation, we're going to go through the questions that we've received, and it's going to take the information we're receiving and getting us geared up for the board presentation. So we have grouped the questions by topic, addressing those questions related to the study first. Some of the comments and questions were received after we finalized our presentation, so they may not have made it onto the slides, but we're going to do our best to get to everything in the next 33 minutes. And being that we did also receive a lot of permitting and enforcement related questions, we will address those at the end if time permits. But any questions or emails that we didn't get to tonight, if we run out of time, we will absolutely be following up directly with the sender. And then there are some questions that were based on our recommendations, which have not been completely developed at this time. We wanted to wait and get all the questions and get feedback from this presentation once the public had an opportunity to receive the study findings and outcomes. Understanding that it was made available a week ago, you've had time at least up till now for some of it, but being that there is still some time before we come before the board, any comments, questions, please continue to send those our way so that we can take that information and formulate our recommendations. All right, so going right into the questions, and these are related to the study. During your study, what benefits did you find relative to the growth of short-term rentals, particularly in the high desert area, such as increased retail sales, higher tax revenue, increases to existing property values due to new construction, etc.? So this study was focused on the impacts of short-term rentals on long-term housing and did not evaluate the fiscal implications. Additionally, there are a relatively small number of permitted STRs in the high desert. So for the purposes of this study and impacts on long-term housing, we focused the study on the mountain and East Desert regions and didn't analyze the information in the North Desert. Next question. Why wasn't Wrightwood included in the short-term rental study? And we didn't have any public outreach meetings scheduled there. The study did cover all mountain communities, including Wrightwood. Unfortunately, the county could not conduct meetings in every community, but opted to conduct 3 meetings throughout the mountain region, and then the virtual meeting we're having tonight. Communities that had the greatest concentration of STRs and where concerns were raised specific to long-term housing availability were identified as the best locations for the 3 outreach meetings in the mountains. Why did the STR study fail to analyze the loss of full-time resident home ownership and impact short-term rentals had on the affordability for locals? So the STR study evaluated the impact of STR activity on both long-term ownership and rental units, more specifically the issues of displacement and housing costs. For existing homeowners, STR activity could not displace existing homeowners. As such, owners either already own their homes outright or have a set mortgage that is unaffected by changes in housing prices. Additionally, existing owners have the choice to sell their home or remain living in their home, and no amount of STR activity can force them to move. So future residents looking to buy the study concluded that STR activity may have contributed to an increase in the prices of existing and newly constructed homes. However, while there was evidence of home values rising faster in areas with the greatest amount of STR activity, the reason for the increase appeared to be at least partially due to lower starting home values. So home values have dropped faster in communities with high numbers of STRs compared to communities with low numbers of STRs. If the value of the STR income were to be more significant factor, one could expect the value of STR income to sustain or soften the decrease in housing prices compared to communities without significant levels of STRs. So instead, the county saw the opposite in housing values. While the decrease in the level of STR activity in 2023 may have contributed to the steeper decline, a large sample analysis conducted by Granicus indicated that nearly half of STR owners earn less than $5,000 per year, and over 90% earn less than the equivalent in long-term rental income. The analysis indicates that the pandemic and other factors created a wave of affluent residents moving to rural unincorporated communities who are willing and able to pay higher rents and sale prices. It appears that most of the new buyers intended to use the homes as seasonal housing with the perk of some level of additional income through STR activity, but not as the primary use. On long-term renters, as public outreach during the housing element update expressed concern about displacement, which can only happen to long-term renters, Program 4 was designed to also focus its analysis on the effects of STRs on long-term rental households. Although anecdotal evidence indicated that some people were being displaced by STR activity, other evidence indicates that these rental households were generally out-competed by new residents willing to pay more, either in purchase price or rent, with many new owners earning little to no income from STR income. And finally, all long-term housing options, Granicus indicated that STRs played a role in limiting long-term housing options, but they could not quantify the magnitude of the role. All right, so next question. PlaceWorks based its main conclusion on census data that ends in 2021. But the Granicus study clearly shows that most of the explosive growth in STRs happened in 2021 and after, outside of the census data. According to Granicus, currently 29% of single-family dwellings in Joshua Tree are STRs, and that number certainly was nowhere near that high in 2021. How can you stand behind conclusions that place so much weight on data that does not include the most crucial transforming years of STR growth? And I'm going to send that one to Colin, if you're okay with that.
Yeah. So the numbers in the Granicus report represent the percentage of single-family homes that are being used as STRs. So the number of single-family homes was based on county assessor data. And the statistic that 29% of single-family homes are used as an STR unfortunately yields no insight on the previous use or tenure of their homes. And that statistic was cited to indicate the relationship of the amount of STRs in the community compared to the amount of single-family homes. So we needed to explore different data sets to determine whether or not short-term rentals were displacing rental households. And the census data cited in the memo identifies the occupancy by tenure, regardless of whether a unit is a single-family home or multifamily unit. And unfortunately, there's no data available from the census for 2022 or 2023 at this time. Accordingly, we used the latest available data, which was for the year 2021. This data is one of the only data sets that offers comprehensive and quantitative statistics as to whether rental households were decreasing and being replaced by short-term rentals. If short-term rentals were previously occupied by a property owner, this would not be displacement, as the property owner would have had full control over the property and full discretion whether to sell or to continue to occupy the unit.
And I just want to kind of back up for a moment. That third question on the slide, we did have some of the other questions that we've received that were a little bit later today, and we had already had the presentation finalized. There is some similar questions that the response I just provided for that covers that in terms of how the short-term rental study satisfies the requirements of Program 4 and just conclusions about rental housing. So we've kind of addressed that through that question as well. All right, so questions about next steps. Since the data suggests that STR caps will not have an effect, what are the county and local cities doing to zone, incentivize the development of more high-density purpose-built rental housing? So there are existing programs in the county within the housing element and through community development and housing. So there are existing actual programs to address that. And then in addition, we do have a density bonus ordinance in regards to being able to incentivize for higher density. Can we implement an added courtesy fee and charge short-term rentals in Wrightwood to put aside money specifically for a Wrightwood Community Service District? For example, charge a $1 a night fee for each STR. This charge can come from the owner to be passed along to the other renter. And we have a few more questions that follow that are more related to TOT that we'll talk about. But, you know, something like this would require, you know, additional study, that there has to be a nexus for charging a fee for something like that. And then for the next, I think 3 questions are related to the TOT. So I'm going to just go through those. All right. Nope. Sorry, I jumped ahead. My apologies. That's on a different slide. Why are we trying to get rid of short-term rentals when they provide jobs and help the local economy? So the purpose of the study was to determine if there's an impact on long-term rentals and if a cap was warranted. And there was no empirical data to support that finding. So it was not purposed to just outright get rid of short-term rentals. What date will the STR study be scheduled for review? And we had mentioned that we've currently tentatively scheduled that for December 19th. And then relative to providing substantive written comments on the STR study to LUS and the board. As I mentioned, you can continue to submit comments to us to the short-term rental at lus.sbcounty.gov. Any comments will be included in the report to the board, and you are also able to send comments to the clerk of the board at cob@sbcounty.gov. And now is the questions about TOT. So I apologize for that. I jumped ahead of myself. So again, for there's going to be 3 questions, but I'll just read them in order. Is it possible for tax revenue collected by the county from Airbnb transactions be returned directly to the community in which the Airbnb property resides? The livelihood of numerous residents relies on tourism income to cover their monthly rent. However, the significant decrease in tourism combined with the closure of Highway 38 has resulted in hardships for these residents. I'm curious to know what portion of the TOT fees collected is allocated towards promoting and growing tourism in the community. And then 3rd question, if nothing is being spent to promote the well-being of our local residents, how can we petition the county to start spending the money collected in the form of TOT taxes be spent in our community instead of being placed in a general fund? So just covering the issue of transient occupancy taxes, they are deposited directly into the general fund, and as such become part of the overall countywide discretionary revenue available to be allocated by the Board of Supervisors for any purpose. The Board of Supervisors continually works with the county's Chief Executive Officer in providing policy direction and goals for the use of county resources to meet the needs of county communities.
Heidi,
yes,
I might add to that. In the budget
Yes,
process, once the TOT goes into the general fund and then through the board's annual budgeting process, revenues, TOT blended into the general fund, are turned into actions that benefit communities. In the 23-24 budget cycle, it included specific investments across the areas of infrastructure, parks, facilities, supporting vulnerable populations, economic development activity, development assistance, capital improvements, and so forth and so on. And so it's through the budget process and the interaction with the Board of Supervisors that actually allocates those funds back to communities throughout the unincorporated area. So the way to interact is with the board in the budget process.
That was my
Uh-oh,
turn
you-
to speak
There
on the mic, yeah. Thank you. So next question, Granicus, the author of this report, appears to offer a range of professional services to governments related to the administration of short-term rental programs on a fee basis, which creates the appearance of a conflict of interest. And the conclusions of the report do not appear to correlate with the included data. Does Granicus provide any of these services to San Bernardino County, and what steps were taken to ensure that the report was conducted impartially and without bias? So we do have a very structured and defined policy on contracting with vendors for services. And the case with contracting with Granicus, it was through the normal process with numerous reviewers and evaluated to ensure there was not any issues of impartiality, or to make sure that it was an impartial process and an impartial selection. All right, so we're into the permitting questions. So you reduced my occupancy numbers suddenly with no warning from 16 people to 12. I held a permit for 16 or more people for 12 years previously. At either renewal or new application, the permit must be issued in compliance with the current ordinance. Since the occupancy limits in the ordinance changed in July 2022, occupancy would have been approved in compliance with the new code. An email blast to communicate the ordinance update was sent to all owners and property managers after the ordinance effective date. Please explain the permit approval process and why it takes 4 to 5 months. What can the owners, management companies, and the county do to shorten this wait time? The average processing time for new application is 60 days. Due to a specific notification appeal time frames in the code, the application cannot be approved any sooner than 50 days. This allows for a 20-day project notice response and a 30-day approval appeal period. Since renewals are not subject to the same time frames, our normal processing time for those is 30 days. Applications submitted with missing documents or a failed inspection will have extended processing times. Given this data, most homes are earning less than $5,000 per year and are rented less than 60 nights per year. It is essential that we go back to biannual permit renewals instead of annual. And at this time, the code currently requires an annual permit. And this would be something that would need to be evaluated in the future and determined if that is the direction we'd want to go. What are the reasons for the annual increase? I'm sorry, what are the reasons for the annual fees increase in light of the facts now demonstrated that the use of short-term rentals are not responsible for pandemic-created changes in residents' decisions or investors' motivation? Sorry, just looking for that question. The fees are consistent with the amount of resources required to process an application and maintain a permit, which also includes the enforcement. Okay. Why are the fees so high for 1 year? Why do you every year fill out a new application and have to pay that fee? In past years, it was biannual. And when we first applied, we filled out application, and the following years, we did not have to pay application fees again. Prior to 2022, the fees were biannual. Find the fees extremely high. I think that many will not get permits, and you will flood the market with cabin foreclosures. So we did kind of cover that in terms of the fees are currently annual. Okay, will the county create an identifiable phone number? Sorry, my apologies. Okay, our number normally shows identified as SB County. However, that might depend on the receiver's service carrier. For that reason, when there's no answer when attempting to contact the property manager, we leave a detailed voice message and attempt contact with the owner if they are two different people. And we encourage you to make sure your voicemail is available for our staff to leave detailed messages. Will the county consider texting STR owners first? Our standard protocol is to reach people by phone, as many of the property managers and owners often provide landline phone numbers. Will the county ban callers to the STR hotline who consistently call up with proven fake complaints? We cannot ban members of the public from exercising their right to use our services. However, we do carefully investigate every complaint to ensure that a complaint is confirmed before any enforcement action is taken. Why is the county unwilling to provide citations to vehicle owners parked illegally instead of STR owners who clearly cannot control where guests park despite the strictest of enforcement? We can issue a citation to the renter. However, this does not exempt an owner operator from receiving a citation for failure to prevent a violation. Hey, can I renew my STR permit if I have a lease to own contract for the property? A person who is not the property owner may apply for a permit, but must provide contact information for the current owner and provide the required signed acknowledgement. The permit is always issued to the owner on record, regardless of any other civil ownership arrangement. Are there any specific requirements or considerations for property owners with lease to own arrangements when you're renewing an STR permit? The answer to that one is our standard process was what we had just mentioned above. And for renewal, do we have to be within 30-day window before closing on the property? A new owner is required to apply for a new permit. Existing permits are not transferable. What is the renewal process for an STR permit in San Bernardino County? And are there any changes in requirements since our initial application? The renewal process is the same as the new application process, except that a renewal is automatically invoiced through our EZOP online system. A renewal is not subject to the notification or appeal timeframes. Are there any updated fees associated with renewing an STR permit? If there are no changes associated with the existing permit, the fee for a renewal is $600 application fee and a $285 permit fee. Can you provide guidance on the documentation or information I need to submit when renewing my STR permit? The renewal process is the same and requires the same but updated forms. Are there any changes in local regulations or zoning ordinances that may affect my ability to operate a short-term rental? And please reach out directly to code enforcement with the parcel number you're inquiring about to obtain specific information. Generally, STRs are allowed in residentially zoned areas. What is the timeline for processing an STR permit renewal application? And when should I initiate the renewal process, especially with a lease to own? The standard renewal process begins 45 days from the expiration date of the current permit. A notification is emailed via EZOP with instructions on the renewal process. Are there any specific safety or compliance measures I should be aware of when renewing my STR permit? Specific conditions and requirements are listed on the owner acknowledgement form, which is linked to the application and found on our website. Are there any restrictions or regulations we should be aware of while hosting a special event? An STR may not be used for any commercial activity, including but not limited to receptions, meetings, weddings, photo shoots, unless approved by another county issued permit. Are there any safety or security measures we should obtain prior to the event? An STR may not be used for any commercial activity, so it's kind of the same as above. So I would contact code enforcement specifically for any questions. So we also had mentioned that there were some questions that we got that we're not able to answer at this time because they're more related to the recommendations and things that will be coming after having this meeting and hearing from you all and getting feedback on the study. So one of the questions is if a reduction in STR permits is deemed necessary, what programs funded by the county will be impacted by the reduced funding, and or currently where is the funding being allocated for funds raised from STR permits and fees, and how would a reduction in STR permits impact the programs funded by these allocations? Given the findings of the impact study, what, if any, new regulations will be implemented? Things that are unknown at this time. Will they be limiting the number of STRs in a geographical area? And is that the final? Okay, so that is the final question that we had. Again, we kind of wanted to make sure that those were included since we did receive them prior to the meeting, but those are just not able to be answered at this time. And I don't know if Colin, you had any additional input that you wanted from the questions that we've looked at, or if we've covered everything.
No, I think everything was covered, and as you said, we'll address those questions that did not make it into the report.
And then Mark Wardlaw, are you wanting to have any final thoughts or information you want to provide before we conclude?
I just wanted to close with our perspective of how important it is for us to provide this information, this type of information early and well in advance of the hearing, so the public has an opportunity to read it, frame their own recommendations, comments, and questions when this item goes to the board for consideration. And we'll be working to formulate our recommendations to the board based on this report, and hopefully we'll make and be placed on the agenda for December 19th, and we'll keep you all posted on our website about our progress and final scheduling of this item. Thank you all very much.
And I just want one final comment, because I do see that there's some hands being raised and we don't have the ability to unmute. So please feel free to reach out. And we've got the email up again. If you have, I will provide my email directly. Most of you have it, but you can also reach out to me. My email is Heidi, HEIDI .Duron, DURON at lus.sbcounty.gov. So anything that didn't get addressed tonight that we weren't able to get into the presentation before we finalized it, we will follow up. And thank you again for your time and for the continued input as we move forward.